Hello, I am Jim Vrecki, Executive Director of Atlanta Master Chorale, and on behalf of the chorale, I welcome you to our Spirited Conversations Behind the Scores program. We continue the spirit of our organizational mission to inspire and enrich the lives of our community. And we're very grateful for all those who support Atlanta Master Chorale and our ongoing programming. Today's guest is a well-known and respected musician, a Los Angeles-based composer and writer. Her music has been performed in the United States and internationally, and she has received amazing acclaim from New York Times. I don't want to spoil the conversation that's going to happen, so let's get on with the program. And please welcome Eric Nelson, Artistic Director of Atlanta Master Chorale, who will open the program and introduce our special guest.
Hello, everyone. It is my joy to welcome Dale Trumbore. Dale is the composer of a piece called In the Middle that we will be performing at our first concert of the year, the weekend of October 14th and 15th. The piece, as we'll talk about later in the interview, is not only a song to be sung in that performance, but actually is the entire philosophical core of the program. All the other pieces in the program were generated because of the text and the thoughts contained in this piece called In the Middle. So let's welcome Dale Trumbore to our spirited conversation today. Hello.
Hi, Eric. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'd like to start with a general background question, which is, how did music find you?
It's a great question. Music found me in a variety of ways. I've been singing in choirs since I was 7. I started piano lessons when I was around that age as well. And I was really lucky to have really supportive music teachers too, who just encouraged me to keep going. They didn't give me so much as composition advice. They just told me to do more of it. So I had a high school choral teacher who let me arrange and all that jazz from Chicago for my varsity treble choir in high school, and a piano teacher who let me, I think, arrange a Christmas carol for a like junior year. It was like this flashy, I don't even remember the tune now, but yeah, just lots of really nurturing teachers and parents who love music, are not anything beyond amateur musicians, but have really just encouraged me along the way.
Yeah. So even at that young age, I think of high school as being young age, you were already exploring the creative side of the discipline beyond singing yourself or playing piano yourself. You were already constructing new music or arrangements of new music. Where does that come from?
I think one of the perks of having piano lessons or just any kind of music lessons as a child is that you have the ability to explore composition without labeling it as such, without thinking like, oh, I'm a composer, or I need to sound like this composer. Like I really, even at age 7, just liked playing around with like different endings to the pieces I was playing. Different chords, like harmonizing things in a different way. And of course, when I was a small child, this was, playing one different note, not even a 3-note chord at the piano. But I briefly, well, not that briefly, on and off for about 10 years, taught piano lessons and really encouraged my students to just try it. I think anyone who wants to try composing should, and not worry about the labels, not worry about being good, but just try something new that's creative.
So your bio states that you were a composition and English double major. Do I have that right, when you were in college?
Yeah.
And I teach at Emory University, where double majors are very common. They aren't in a lot of places, but they are at the place where I happen to teach. So I feel like I am in daily and yearly contact with a lot of folks that are doubly or trebly gifted and interested. And it sounds like you were one of those that could have kind of gone either way. And it's interesting that you've kept that duality in your life, right? You still not only compose in music, but also compose in words and language. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, but it is, I think, slightly unusual for someone to be a composition major at the undergraduate level. It's not unprecedented or rare. I mean, lots of schools have composition tracks, but it seems like for many musicians at that age still in college, they're still trying to figure out how to sing or trying to figure out how to play, and then later start to realize that, hey, I'm interested in the composition side of things too. They learn more repertoire, more things are in their ear, they have more theory classes, right? So I'm interested that you declared or became a composition major kind of right out of the gate. And so is there more to that story, or have you already said it because you've been experimenting with it from a young age?
Yeah, so I have an aunt who is a poet and was the poet laureate of Louisiana from, I think, 2013 to 2014.
Wow.
Who I like to talk about as a big inspiration beyond just my parents, who are editors and writers. I had, almost everyone in my family, on my mom's side in particular, has been a writer or an editor at some point, or still is. So that's where that came from.
Okay.
And they very much, nurtured my love of writing little poems and short stories and things. And then music, again, really supportive high school choir teacher, Dr. Barbara Crooker, encouraged me to go beyond a junior year, like sort of intro to music theory class and do my own guided study AP music theory experiment. So I was just in the computer lab by myself doing ear training exercises for a semester.
As one does.
As one does when one's a dorky little composer. But that really assured me that I was interested in sort of the technical side of composing and not just the arty, just put down whatever's in my brain. No, I also liked thinking about how do these chords interact? How am I shaping the form of a piece? Obviously, I think about that a lot more now that I've had much more experience with composing. But even then, I was like, ooh, like I'm like kind of good at this, and it's really fun, and like maybe I should do that for the rest of my life.
Nice. Can we talk about this piece of yours called "In the Middle"? I've got it right in front of me. If I might, for those that are on the call that may not know the piece, I want to read the first portion, the first little bit of this poem, which is not written by you, though you are a fine poet in your own right. But this is written by Barbara Crooker from a book or a collection called Radiance. I'm going to ask a follow-up about that in a minute. And this is the way that this poem begins. In the middle of a life that's as complicated as everyone else's, struggling for balance, juggling time. The mantle clock that was my grandfather's has stopped at 9:20. We haven't had time to get it repaired. The poem very cleverly repurposes the word time, or the idea of time, all throughout the poem. It keeps coming back in slightly different contexts. The idea that the clock is broken and we haven't had time to get it fixed. And the reason we haven't had time to get it fixed is because our life is really busy. All that stuff is wonderfully jumbled up. And then there's a moment near the end of the piece where it says, time is always ahead of us, running down the beach, urging us on faster, faster. But sometimes we take off our watches. Sometimes we lie in the hammock, caught between the mesh of rope and the net of stars, suspended, tangled up in love, running out of time. And I find there's a poignancy in that, which is clever, and that we can all relate to. And the suspension of being in a hammock between the earth and the air gets all tangled up with being between the past and the future. And the idea that we're all running out of time actually brings me back to I'm in a hurry, and yet we shouldn't worry so much about being in a hurry. It's a tremendously beautiful and complicated poem. So my first question is, before we talk about how beautifully you said it, is where did you find it? Is Barbara a friend of yours? Did you come across it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I had worked with Barbara. She's actually a friend of the poet aunt, Julie Kane, that I mentioned. And so I had put out a call with Julie's help for fairy tale poems for a song cycle that I wrote and then later recorded in 2011. And Barbara had responded to that call. And so I'd signed up, I think I'd signed up for her email newsletter thing that just updates whenever she posts a new poem on her website. And I can't remember I think this popped up there, or it popped up on Facebook or something on the internet, where I clicked on it. And as I mentioned in the program note for this piece, I was at the beach with my family in a place that I go to almost every year. And when I'm there, I take a picture with my cousins who, growing up, we were all there. They're twins, and we were all there at the same time. And so I have these pictures of us from, I think, age 2 all the way through 2 years ago, I think or 1 year ago was the last time I went. And, we all sometimes we're traveling, but when I'm in this place, I very much am thinking about the passage of time. I'm thinking about how I've changed since I've been there. And so I found this poem, and, I'm across the street from a literal beach. There's a literal hammock out. I could see out the window. And it just hit at exactly the right time, where I read it and instantly was like, I have to set this to music. And luckily, I've worked with Barbara now enough times that I just send her a quick email and say, I love this poem of yours. Can I set this for this chorus or this soprano? And she gets back to me within a day or so and says yes. So far, knock wood, hopefully she keeps saying yes. But yeah, on a purely poetic level, I love this poem for not just the richness of the imagery, the way that it starts in the middle of the poem. Like the title we read the title and we're already reading the poem, right? So I think that's such a clever way of just thrusting us into not only the language, but the meaning of the poem. And then I love that the more you live with this poem, the more it applies to your own life. I found even since I've said it, it just resonates deeper and deeper when I return to it, as any good poem should.
Your setting of it is quite extraordinary, and I think it would be maybe helpful to our listeners. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the folks that are listening to this conversation know the piece or have sung or conducted the piece, heard it performed, but it's also quite possible that they haven't. So before I ask some more specific questions about your setting of the piece, let's see whether we can give a listen. This is, I don't think it was was it the premiere? No, it had been performed before. Yeah, in fact, I'm sure that I knew about the piece through your website. It was already on my short list of pieces that I wanted to do soon before this performance. This is a performance at the National American Choral Directors Association convention, performed by the wonderful Oakwood Aeolians and their director at the time, Jason Max Ferdinand. He's since left this post and taken a position at the University of Maryland.
Which is where I actually met Jason at the University of Maryland.
Okay.
He was getting a doctorate and I was getting an undergrad, and I got to pick which choir out of a short list of 5 would perform this piece at ACDA. And I was like, it has to be Jason.
That one.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Yes.
Let's give it a listen. I can't hear it enough.
The mantle clock that was my grandfather's has stopped at 9. 9:20. We haven't had time to get it repaired. The brass pendulum is still. The chimes don't ring. One day I look out the window, green soaring summer. The next, the leaves have already fallen, and a gray sky lowers the horizon. Our children almost grown, our parents gone. It happened so fast. Each day we must learn again how to love. Between morning's quick coffee and evening's slow return, steam from a pot of soup rises, mixing with the yeasty smell of baking bread. Our bodies twine, and the big black dog sheds his great head between his tail a metronome. 3/4 We'll never get there. Time is always ahead of us, running down the beach, urging us on faster, faster. But sometimes we take off our watches. Sometimes we lie in a hammock, caught between the mesh of rope and the net of stars. Suspended, tangled up in love. Running out of time, running out of running out of time, 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 running, 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 running.
What a great piece, Dale.
Thanks.
I'm
It helps.
curious what your reactions are hearing that again.
I mean, it's funny as the accompanist in this video, and I don't know if you ever do this listening to recordings, there's still a little part of me that gets like nervous for the me performing in the video, which is so silly because I've obviously heard that recording before and I know I don't make any mistakes, but I think it takes me back to being like, don't mess up, like this, oh my gosh. But I also very viscerally remember that feeling of being surrounded by these singers who really sound like a studio recording when they're singing live around you, and to be immersed in that with like surround sound, you know, was just an amazing experience. They're an incredible ensemble, and I'm so grateful. I'm again reminded of that gratitude that I felt then and still feel now for that performance.
So let's chat a little bit about this piece that I love so much. You have a motive that I think it's fair to say, there's a bunch of motives, but there's an obvious motive that the piece hangs on. That's kind of the scaffolding where it moves pendulum-like between two chords on the word time. Time, often twice. Time. And that happens right near the very beginning of the piece, and then often on at key points throughout. Sometimes in compositions, a composer has an idea that comes early on and everything kind of emerges from that. And then there's some things that seem to be structural that actually came late. I've written some pieces myself where something occurs to me kind of in an edit after the piece is nearly done. And then as it gets kind of layered back through because it was a good idea, it ends up seeming like it's what the piece was built on. So I'm curious, how early did that notion of those two chords come to you? And what was it kind of organic where you put it? Or was that just part of the struggle of the craft of bringing it to life?
Yeah, so when I approach any poem before I set it to music, I read through it a bunch of times and I have a pencil in hand and I underline if words or images are similar. I underline them and I draw little arrows connecting them together. Sometimes when I'm talking on a Zoom like this, I have a poem within reach that I can show, but I think I'd have to get up and grab one to show you my messy scribbling. But I know for this one, I saw the word time recurring and knew that I wanted to link that musically on the same way that it's linked on the page. So that was a very early on concept, deciding how that would be painted, and it's time sort of, I don't want to, attribute too much meaning to these two chords, but time is sort of dragging us down a little bit, right? We're feeling this pull of time this weight of time. And then something that occurred later on in the piece was the idea that love, when love comes in at the end, and this idea of love being what sort of lets us escape the feeling of being weighed down by time. This idea that love would have chords resolving up instead. So we're transcending that just for a brief moment. And then time kicks back in, and our little Zen moment of feeling like we're existing in the perfect moment, or we're existing perfectly in the moment, whether that moment's perfect or not. Right. Eventually, I think we lose that, and we have to keep consciously coming back to that. But yes, it was an early on concept, and then also in some ways a later on concept as well.
That's spectacular. One of the things that probably is obvious to others, but it took me a couple of passes through before I noticed it. You mentioned that the poem's title is In the Middle, and then see if I can pull this from the inside of your piece for the camera. There, the title is In the Middle, and then the first words are of a life that's as complicated. So you mentioned that in a way, once you've read the title, you're already engaged in the poem, and you do a similar thing in the music itself. And as I say, it took me a couple passes of rehearsing and learning the piece before I noticed it. It's very common that a composition will have an introduction of some sort. That in this case, the piano would begin to play. If it's an a cappella piece, there might be some, there's usually some kind of
oohs
preamble.
And ahs.
Yeah, oohs and ahs. There's some kind of preamble that gets the piece underway. And often that's when motives will be introduced that are going to be played with for the rest of the piece. And the first thing that happens in this piece is the upper voices singing in the middle of a life, right? And piano doesn't even play a chord at that point. The piano is in the midst of passage work. And it feels very much like we're picking this up in the middle of a piece that's already started. When did that come to you?
I think that was another early idea. But it's always, I know I thought about the slight risk in doing that, which is that you either need a choir with strong enough aural skills to be able to take the end of their last piece and maybe hear the G and then go straight into the piece. And then you run a risk too, if the piece before it's a cappella, maybe the pitch is sunk a little bit, maybe you do need to give that pitch again. But I think it's worth that gamble. And most choirs do that, you know, pull out a pitch pipe, or someone in the choir hums a G and then you start there. But yeah, it's interesting in that most pieces you sort of have to give, you want to give a note or a bell tone. I grew up with loving musical theater too, and you'll hear, you know, that like the scale degree 5, like boom, and then and then you know you get your starting note from that. But I definitely again wanted this piece to feel like we're just in it when it starts.
It seems clear to me that, but I'll ask the question. The poem rises and falls and reacts so closely, it tracks so closely to the words of the poem. It feels episodic in a way. You know, like we're setting this phrase, then this phrase, then this moment, then this moment, then this moment. And then it ends up being all tied together, mostly by that, but there's also a falling sixth. One day you look out the window, and there's that happens a bunch of times. Sometimes we lie in the hammock. And then there's also there's also a triad in the piano part, bing bong bong, that happens a good bit, which is oddly chimey. That only the pianist notices probably in the singing of the piece, and lots of other little things that kind of come back with variants. So the piece is bound together architecturally very tightly and very beautifully. But on first hearing, and frankly on first read through, when I got the score and sort of kind of learning it in my own ear, it seems like it doesn't have kind of a 3 verses and a chorus, right? It doesn't kind of have an introduction, a verse, a chorus, second verse, chorus, modulation, descant, right? There's some isms of choral music that aren't there at first. It's very rhetorical, very close. As I say, it tracks so closely to the poem, and that to me tells me that the words come first, or at least it did in this instance. I heard the pop EGOT, John Legend, interviewed in a talk show just a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that he's constantly recording what he calls mumble tracks. Where he'll sit at the piano and do some chords that he finds interesting, and he'll make up a melody that doesn't yet have any words. And then he'll put words on it later. So for him, the music kind of takes shape, and then he puts words on it that make sense. In this case, and I've talked too long here setting up this question, but in this case, it seems clear to me that the words came first. My follow-up question to that is, if that's true, is that always the case? Do words come first for you in writing a new piece?
Yeah, they always do. And that's because for most of my pieces, although this is changing now, but for most of my composing life, I've used other people's words. And so I want to derive every bit of musical material from those words. We think of text painting sometimes as like running up a hill is, you know, an ascending scale. That's melodic text painting, but I want to explore harmonic text painting, rhythmic text painting, textural text painting. What does it mean? How do we let the words and the mood of the poem and sometimes shifting moods of the poem influence literally every aspect of the music? So I love that as sort of, I'm sort of digging into the poem. I get to explore and unearth it and do all that unpacking first before I even write a note. I love that part of the process. And I will say the exception to that is when I'm writing my own poetry. I do like, so the words still come first. I try and write a complete poem that I'm happy with just as words on a page. more or less. I'm a little bit self-critical sometimes, so there's always like a little bit of unhappiness, but
You're a child of editors.
Exactly. I am constantly editing even when something's done,
Sure.
because of the way I was raised. But my mom used to edit my literally every essay I wrote from, I think, middle school through high school. I'd give it to her and she'd hand it back with red pen or blue. I think she didn't use red, blue pen. Anyway, when I write my own poems, I love that when I'm at the piano, I can change things in the moment. If I think the melody should go just slightly differently, I can change the wording a little bit to fit that. But at the same time, even then, I'm still trying to stay true. I'm still trying to derive everything from the words that are already on the page.
You've written short essays on, I'll call it your blog. I don't know if the term we use anymore, but also books and essays about the act of composition. You've written a little bit about getting through writer's block and various things that are kind of insights and pulling back the curtain on the craft for you. But you've also written just straight up fiction and short stories. How similar or how dissimilar is the process of looking at a blank piece of paper and responding to a commission and starting a new piece of music as opposed to starting a new essay? Is there any overlap in this process for you?
So I want to talk about this to the extent that I want to write an essay about this, about how it's different. So thank you for asking this question, because I've been looking for an excuse to articulate it. At least with fiction, it's very different in that and with essays too. So with composing, I like to pick a text when I have a new commission. I like to agree on a text with the conductor, and I send over 2 to 3 texts that I love. If the conductor's like, I don't respond to any of these, I'll send some more or offer to write one. But once that's set, I like to have that set like a year before the piece is due, so that even before I start composing, long before I start composing, I can just go back and read that poem without marking it up, without doing anything to it, without thinking about how the piece will go necessarily. Just read the poem and live with it for maybe 6 months before I start composing. When I write a short story, I'll sort of do the same thing where I have little like germs of an idea, and I'll keep a notes app on my phone or a Google Doc or something going where I'm just sort of blurting out these little like tiny, you can think of like musical motives, right? Maybe the way we talked about time, I'm thinking about like, what's the essence of this story or of this essay? And then when it comes time to do it, I just sort of, I want to write that first draft as quickly as possible. I just want to get it down. And then I edit it and I put it aside and I come back to it and I edit it and then I take more time. Whereas with a composition, when it's time to write that piece, I'm writing that piece, I'm editing the piece, I'm editing it some more, I'm editing it again and again and again and again. And then I send it off and it's done. Then I make a few more changes in the rehearsal process and then I put those and then it's done. And I'm composing pretty much all the time. I have little breaks. I give myself like a month off sometimes, but I'm just composing. With fiction and with essays, I'm not writing words all the time. I'm taking sometimes 6-month breaks between them, but I'm doing the same thing where I'm letting those little ideas germinate, so that when I'm ready, when someone asks me to write a short story, that has not happened yet, but when someone asks me to write an essay, which happens more often, I'm ready. I have all these ideas ready to go. Yeah, so it's similar and it's different, and I'm just very intrigued by how I thought it would all be similar. I thought like, oh, I'm going to start writing again, and just like composing, I'll be writing, in the background of composing all the time. And no, that's not how I work at all. I'm sort of oh gosh, I think the writer Cheryl Strayed calls it a sprinter versus, I forget what the other term is, but where you show up and you do the thing and then you don't do the thing for like maybe a year and then you do the thing again. And that's equally valid as being a full-time composer and just sort of writing constantly throughout the year. They're equally valid ways to create, and I do both.
It's fantastic that you've been able to keep both of those overlapping but often separate career paths so actively a part of your life, even if the schedule is a little bit different. You are, I think you'll agree with this, this statement that's almost a cliche, that if a piece of music comes across my desk, which as a conductor happens all the time, sometimes from publishers, sometimes from composers themselves saying, hey, I just wrote this piece, you might like it. If that piece, if the text of that piece is also written by the composer, there's almost a sense to which I roll my eyes a little bit. Not every really good music composer is also a good wordsmith. You, and there's a couple of other folks, Robert Bodie comes to mind. There's a couple of folks that really are wonderful wordsmiths in addition to being wonderful composers and wonderful artists and musicians. And so, yeah, congratulations on that. I think it affords you, I think that the result of that affords you a way in that is maybe a little harder for others. I mean, I think your love of words comes through in pieces like In the Middle. In the musical results, I think, are at a level of detail and care that not every composer is able to get to. Because words are so important to you, and you see them in all of their layers and nuance and implication, and you know how you could possibly hint at those things and bring and illuminate those things through music. That's a big ask, and you do it really beautifully.
Thanks. Yeah, again, I want music that the more I say I want music, I want my own music to do this, and I want it in the music that I listen to. I want music that the more time you spend with it, the more you unearth something new. Just like I said at the start of this call, I want music you can live with over time. There's that word again. Yeah. But I know you're not the first conductor by any means to say that you're a little skeptical of composers writing their own texts. Yeah. And I think, honestly, I think that's because a lot of composers don't have practice. They don't have those years of writing bad poems in order to get to, you know, the good enough poem that generates a great choral piece. And that's something I, as an occasional educator, you know, sometimes I teach on faculty at a choral festival, or I'll go work with college students. And I've been trying to formulate a sort of workshop or like a presentation at the very least that encourages composers, encourages everyone to try writing their own words and practice it, and let yourself be bad at it, and let yourself iterate through, you know, the 5 drafts that are not great to get to the 6th draft that you will actually set to music. I think it's absolutely a skill that can be practiced. And even if some people have more, whatever you want to call it, innate talent at it, I think that's so often just a product of that person having spent time honing that skill.
Lovely. I will say to you and also to our listeners that I hinted at this at my very first opening, that the richness of this poem has influenced the entire October concert in living with the ideas in Barbara Crooker's poem of trying to take off our watches and lie in the hammock and be aware of this moment in time. There's a lot of music I started thinking about that asks us to be in the present, to take advantage of the current moment. And then there are pieces, we're doing the Dylan Thomas poem, Fern Hill, written by John.
Oh, I love that piece.
It pairs
That's like a formative piece in my choral life.
I think it's one of the great pieces of the 20th century, and it's underperformed, but it's a perfect pairing within the middle, because Dylan Thomas writes about his childhood, and it seems to be a nostalgia piece for a good long while, but then he comes back around to saying that, you know, time let me be and play at that time, but he realizes now that he was already in thrall. He was already in the chains of time. Time was already had him even then. So as he looks back on his past, he realizes that yeah, the time comes into the story. And then there's a beautiful line at the end of Fern Hill that says, I was in the chains of time. I forget exactly how it's phrased, but I sang in my chains
like the sea.
Yeah. It was just, it doesn't change how much he loved his childhood and time. I think there's a line there about time gives us so few of such carefree days. There's some music that also looks back to the past, but through the lens of the future. Now I know what I see. And then there's a couple pieces that look forward to the future in the sense of what I'm experiencing right now in this moment may be difficult or painful, but that I know that through the passing of time, in just a little while, it's going to be okay, or it's going to be different. And so I must thank you not only for this wonderful piece that I adore so much, but the entire hour and 15 minutes of music, the path that we will be on in a couple of weeks is born out of the ideas in this piece. It is an unintended pun. It is a timely piece. All of us are in the grips of the passing of time, and also dealing in 2022 with being too busy, right? Or being in the middle of a life that's as complicated as anyone else's. And there's some empathy in that line too that I think is helpful for us to be reminded of. We start to think that we're the only ones dealing with work-life issues, but we're all dealing with this as best we can. So an additional heartfelt thank you for the ideas that came to me because of your piece. Do you think that those, it's a beautifully written piece, Dale, but do you think that the ideas inherent in the piece is partly why it's one of your more popular pieces, more often performed pieces?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a large part of it is that it was performed perfectly at ACDA to an audience of 2,000 choir directors. But
is that?
It's funny, when I write a piece, I never know the reception it's going to have. And sometimes a piece I think like, oh, this one, surely like the high school conductors will love it and it'll get done a lot, like, and then it gets a few performances and it's not. This piece, I remember writing it, and I just really, this is like one of my favorite pieces in my catalog, and always has been before it got slightly more popular than it was before. But I think in many ways thought it was maybe too complicated. Even the word complicated is set in a 5/4 measure, and I've seen conductors be like, "What is it? 2 + 3 or 3 + like it perplexes people." The changing time signatures,
which is the
piano
point.
part is hard, which is the point exactly. But it's kind of funny to me that this has become one of the more performed pieces, in that it's a challenge, and it's supposed to be a challenge because it's, in a way, it's text painting, right? It's making this piece that's a little bit thorny, and you have to sort of unwind it to live with it. So I truly can't ever predict why or how or when a piece will hit the way it does, but I do know this, when singers sing this, it's one of the pieces where this happens the most, where in rehearsals or after the performance, people will come up to me or email me and say, "Oh my gosh, the line," and sometimes it's a different line every time. It's like the black dog, or it's the soup, or it's the bread, where that line just sticks with people for months or years. And just resonates with their own life. Like someone in their life makes soup for them, and they get to that line and they're like, "Oh, I just like it invites you to bring your own lived experience into the performance." And I look for that in every poem that I set.
Beautifully said. As we move this conversation to the end, let me ask you an open-ended question that you can answer anywhere you want. I suspect there are some things coming up for you that are next, and some things coming up for you that are next that you are excited about. So to the extent that you're interested or able to let us in, can you tell us a couple of the things that are coming down the pike for you?
Yeah, so on Friday, I have a premiere with Conspirare
Oh,
of a piece that will then be performed by Choral Arts Initiative here in Southern California, where I live. Conspirare is doing a version with string quartet, and CAI is premiering the chorus and piano version of a 10-minute piece setting a poem that went viral called The Opposites Game. And it's an English teacher. The poet who wrote it, Brendan Constantine, does this kind of work with children where they're looking at an Emily Dickinson poem. They're finding the opposite of every word to try and make a new poem, and they get to the word gun, and there's a pause and then just an explosion of answers. What is the opposite of a gun? And that's just the whole poem is exploring that question, and it's just so moving. And I read the poem and started crying, which like has only happened twice, like with 2 poems in my life. I mean, I've like teared up at poems, but like just like weeping. I don't know. There's a line about the post office that like gets me. Maybe people listening to this, maybe if you hear this piece when it's premiered, you'll understand. But you could go read it right now. The poem is, again, The Opposites Game by Brendan Constantine. It's just a gorgeous poem, and I'm so excited that it's getting these 2 performances with groups that I admire so much.
fantastic. You don't know this yet, but I'm going to be in touch with you very quickly after this phone call to see whether we can get on your commission schedule. I'm sure you're lined up in the future, quite a long ways out. But Atlanta Master Chorale would love the chance to do have part of bringing a Dale Trumbore piece to life in the future. So
I would love that too.
We'll be in touch, and the listeners can look forward to that if and when that is possible. Thank you for the pieces that you have already brought to life, for the words that you've brought to life as well. I know you're an important guide and influence to, well, I was going to say young composers, but all composers. I can speaking for myself, yours is one of a handful of composers' websites that I constantly refresh just to see if you've posted anything new, because I want to get in early and often to what's going on. So I'm very, very grateful for what you bring to the choral art. We're an odd niche profession. We seem to be very different than pop music, and even different than a soloist singing. But there's something about people singing together that I have a hard time explaining it to people. But when a composer does it well and exploits that art form in a way that brings the music and the poem and those collective voices together, it's a beautiful thing, and you're one of those. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I struggle to answer that question too, and what makes choral music different. And I think it's that there's no barrier between who we are and the music we're making. And I think it's that there's just an inherent humanness. There's no other instrument other than ourselves. I mean, obviously we might have a piano accompanying, but the fact that it's humans making sounds, I think other people, we just respond to that instinctively in a really beautiful way. And that's why I have made this my life and my career, is just for that feeling of connection. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Jim, with that, we'll bring this to a close.
Yeah, and there's one question that cropped up, if I could.
Sure.
Lisa asks, she noticed when she visited your website, Dale, that you're working on something for choir and singing audience. And can you share more about that, or whatever you want to share?
Yeah, that'll be in December 2023. So it's still a ways off. It'll be a large scale piece where the audience has refrains that they sort of pick up along the way, and rounds. And I'm really interested in exploring that, because that sense of community I was talking about, I have one piece already called Returning that used that idea. And of course, this isn't a new concept. And I find in spiritual communities, that happens so often. The audience or the congregation sings along with the choir or a soloist. So yeah, and the texts actually for that piece are all by Barbara Crooker. The entire libretto is by Barbara Crooker. So if you like in the middle, I don't know when you'll be able to listen to this piece, January or March 2024, say, you'll probably enjoy that as well. Oh, it's a calendar too. It's a rotating calendar. So you start in any month. Like if you perform it in July, you start in July and you circle through all the months back to July.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Hey, thank you, Dale, for joining us. For those of us on the East Coast, in the middle of the day. And we are so grateful for all that you have shared with us and for learning a little bit more about the song in the middle. Thank you all for joining us and for all the support you give us. We're just a little over a week and a half from our opening concert in the middle, which will take place on October 14th and 15th at the Schwartz Center for Performing Arts on the campus of Emory University. I hope you can join us in person or by live stream. You can see our website for all information about our season for this upcoming concert, and any other information you want. We'll also be posting things on our social media platforms prior to these events. Thanks again for joining us and have a great week.